For our meditation time, we have something very special called a hymn to freedom. We're going to use this for in lieu of our reading and our silent time. The words are by Harriet Hamilton, and John Calishaw selected this, music by Oscar Peterson, arrangement by Jim Clancy. He thought this would be really good for us to do on the Sunday before Memorial Day, and I agree. So we have our little online choir there, and this time we have backup singers. I love this. Our backup singers are the vocal majority choir. John can just do all those kinds of things. And something very special today is our introduction has the trumpet on it and features young Mason Thompson from Statesboro on trumpet. So enjoy this hymn to freedom. Wow, just wow. That's what I have to say about that. I want to share with you that we have special speakers today. We have guest speakers. We can do that too, and they don't even have to. We don't have to pay their travel expenses. That's one good thing about this being on Zoom. They can just send it to us. So I asked our Southern Region staff. They had been planning to come actually next weekend. They were going to come and do a workshop for us and for both our congregations and some others all together in this area. We were going to go down to the Savannah Church and have a workshop together, but of course that didn't work out. We're not going to do that. So I asked them if instead of doing that, if they would be willing to share a couple of sermons with us. and they have. And we're going to be we're going to be listening to these this week and next week. The two people are Connie Goodbread. She's a co-lead in the UUA Southern Region. And then her colleague, Reverend Carlton E. Smith, he's part of their staff, the Congregational Life staff at UUA Southern Region. They have chosen When Hope is Hard to Find. She will share with you, you'll hear her share the covenant that they have for that Southern Region staff. And the Southern Region staff adopted this covenant using what we refer to as the 5 smooth stones. That comes from an essay by James Luther Adams, very famous Unitarian theologian, was a professor for a while at Meadville Lombard. And they've used those main words, hope, love, justice, courage, and joy, in their own covenant. So they're sharing a series of messages. I think they're going to do more than these, but this one they're doing today is based on that first one with hope, about hope. And then she will share this whole covenant, but the title they gave to their sermon is When Hope is Hard to Find, which of course comes from the song we just sang about, Come Sing a Song With Me, When Hope is Hard to Find. And that seems especially relevant for today. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just back away and let them share this sermon. It's a dialogue sermon. I introduce to you Carlton Elliott Smith and Connie Goodbread.
I'm Connie Goodbread. I'm one of the co-leads of the Southern Region staff team. I live in Palm Harbor, Florida, which is part of the Tampa Bay area.
And I'm Reverend Carlton E. Smith. I live in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and I am also a member of the Southern Region team of our Unitarian Universalist Association. The title of our sermon today is When Hope is Hard to Find. And Connie and I are doing this together as a kind of dialogical sermon because we believe that God and Spirit lives inside of our conversations with one another.
With hope for a bright future, I come in trust. With love in my heart for all of creation, I come in humility. Seeking justice for all, marginalizing none, I come in open-mindedness. With courage, I come willing to be transformed. With great joy, I come to bind myself to you so that together we can do what I cannot do alone. We're living in some pretty traumatic times, and trauma is remembered inside of our bodies, inside of our souls, inside of our minds. And so there are times when the trauma that we are witnessing, watching others live through, or even experiencing ourselves, it's going on right at this moment, affects us in a way that we can't even fathom why it's happening for us the way it's happening. So we'll bring up other things that have happened to us in our past. In those moments, I just wonder if we, as Unitarian Universalists, can come to what's at the center of Unitarian Universalism that will sustain us through this time and help us to come out on the other side with something that is different, maybe better. In the Southern Region, we've done several leadership experiences. We've been doing them for a long time, and we grounded much of our work in the 5 Smooth Stones of Liberal Religion, which was an essay that was written by James Luther Adams. Because Carlton and I and everybody else on our team like to simplify everything that we do down to the very essence of why we're doing everything, we came to the 5 values that were present in the covenant that I read: hope, love, justice, courage, and joy. So in the song by Carolyn McDade, she says, I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. So I'm wondering, what brings us hope? What do we cling to? And how have we seen hope played out? Carlton, aren't you were talking to me about reading a book recently?
Yes, the book that I am reading now is a book entitled Embracing Hopelessness, which is by the theologian, preacher, and scholar Miguel de la Torre. And it has me giving some additional thoughts to what hope means and what hope can mean for each of us. And there was one sentence in here that I found especially powerful, because he's doing his theology from a liberation perspective. And he tells us that hope is possible when privilege allows for a future. And in the midst of our conversation about hope, I'm holding that intention with what I believe is that hope can be a very powerful thing, along with this idea that he presents, that it's really only available to those of us who have the means and the resources with which to, and the history, past history, with which to have a hopeful future. So as we're going through this COVID-19 pandemic, I can't help but think about the many people who are without housing and how they might be experiencing this event much differently than those of us who are able to work from home, those of us who continue to have employment, those of us whose health isn't particularly at risk, and have experiences of hopelessness that we can draw from our own personal histories as well as those of the people who've gone before us. But I'm thinking about, my ancestors who were enslaved, some of them for all of their lives. They would not have had the same experience of hopefulness because there wasn't hope for the folks who came before them or for them in their generation. But but hopefully, there's that word again.
Uh-huh.
I hope is that we can move beyond the limitations of what hope means and are able to expand it in a way such that that we have the experience of motivation to make a difference in the world. And that's the point of his whole essay, is that if we're able to embrace and identify with the hopelessness of other people, then we'll be motivated to bring about change.
And so hope is available to everyone then?
Ultimately, yes.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. But there's a possibility that hope could be available to more than just a few people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's only going to come at the point that we are willing to embrace the severe lack that other people are experiencing when we're able to identify with them, because otherwise there's not a lot of motivation to change. But we're trying to work through that even as we're talking about it now.
That's right. Yeah, so as you were talking, I was also thinking that we also have to take time to actually explain what it is we mean by these words. So what does hope mean to us, and what does hopelessness mean? And I think that you and I have experienced recently with meeting with different congregations that online in this medium that we're using right now, we've heard them say over and over again that their experiences are so outside of anything normal that they need places to go and talk about what they're experiencing without judgment or without fear of being seen poorly. And I'm reminded of, we teach systems theory at each one of the leadership experiences, and systems theory is our seventh principle, our interdependent web. And so it says that everything is connected. And it was hypothesized by Ludwig von Bertalanffy in the 40s. And in the book that he wrote called General Systems Theory, he applied the idea that everything is connected to all of the disciplines, all of the scientific disciplines. And when he came to linguistics, the chapter on linguistics is fascinating because it says that even when we speak the same language and we have grown up in essentially the same culture, even then, if we don't stop and talk about what it is we mean by what we're saying, we aren't actually communicating. Everybody walks away thinking they've been heard and thinking they understand the words of others, and they often don't. Do you remember that staff meeting that we had in Florida? We had condos. It was by Disney World. We had, there were the 9 of us there, and we had a meeting where we were given, each of us were given roles. We were doing role and lane. We were being given responsibilities and who was accountable for what. And I was given leadership development. And I was, for the first time in this work, I was really clear on what my job was. And I thought, this is great. And so I'm driving home. Since the thing was in Florida, I got to drive home. So I'm driving home, and I'm thinking the whole way, oh, wait, I wonder if everybody else thinks it's the same thing I think it is. So I called everybody on the team, and I got 9 different definitions of what my job was. And we're even people that do the same work. So I think it's really important that we, as Unitarian Universalists, as human beings in general, stop and take the time. And this is another thing that we could be doing with this particular tool. We could be gathering in small groups and discussing very deeply the meanings that we hold for the words that we're using, that we're trying to communicate with one another. I'm also reminded of a story that 2 different versions of the same story from my father and my grandmother during the Great Depression. My grandmother was a very hopeful person. My father was not. She grew up in abject poverty. He did not. They were dirt farmers. They were itinerant farm workers. They had nothing. And she got married just before the Depression hit. And the man that she married was a lineman and was stringing lines from along the railroad tracks. And they got to live in boxcars. And so they made these boxcars into these little trailers with actually 3 rooms in them. She thought it was the best thing ever. They'd get together at night, and they'd all have a bonfire, and they'd sing, and they'd play music, and everybody danced. And she remembers the Great Depression from that standpoint, that it was like her own awakening and breaking out of the poverty that she grew up in. And my father saw it as this horrible time where he never knew where they were going to be, and they were never sure about the food, and it was all just so desperate. So even then, even in the same household, you can have very different memories and very different experiences, and then very different meanings for the words. You had a story too. You told me a couple of days ago about a story when you were working in a hospital. That was really interesting.
Yes, along that same line about not knowing what people actually are needing and finding definitions for hope that are difficult. I came across a patient in my training to become a minister. This is actually a few decades ago now. I was doing my internship at Overlook Hospital in Summit, New Jersey. I just finished my internship. I was doing my clinical pastoral education there. And it's a supervised chaplaincy where you're assigned to a floor and you go and visit the different patients on that floor. And it was suggested to me that I go in and see a man who had just had his leg amputated from just below his left knee. And I went in to be with him, and it's true, he was in quite a state because it had just happened like a couple of days before, and he was really grieving all that he wasn't going to be able to do because he no longer had both of his legs. And I didn't know what to say to him in the midst of that. So I just got quiet, and I was trying to figure out like what could I share, what could I offer as a word of hope or encouragement. And I didn't really have anything to draw from because, I don't have any experience that related to that. So I just got quiet, and the room got quiet for a while. And that gave him time to reach and find his own reserves and his own resources within himself. And he said, hey, but wait a minute, I still got my right leg. And he still had his whole right leg. And he started to wiggle his right leg around, and he just got very excited and grateful that he still had the full use of his other leg. And that was an example to me of, even in very challenging situations, if we can find our way back to gratitude, there is hopefulness that can be found in that. One of the ministers at a congregation I was attending as a young adult would say, something like, we're grateful that things are as well as they are, and just being grateful for that. And even in the midst of this pandemic situation, there are things that could be worse. I mean, it's very, very hard, and much harder for some of us than for others. But at the same time, if we use the fullness of our imagination, we can always say that, well, things could be worse. They actually could be worse. So this is something that I, ponder often myself. And then just thinking about, how we use words, another idea that comes to me is just the importance of when we come together, us being on a similar accord with each other. And that's why when we come together, as we're doing workshops or programs, we're often creating a covenant for the group, so that when we're in conversation with one another, we have a common understanding of what it means to show respect for each other, and set up practices that we're going to use so that each person has a chance to speak, that we're honoring that each person has a voice and something to add to the group. But we only get to that inside a conversation, as you were saying before, when you reached out to all of us on the team to find out like what we meant when we were using words. And so I think that's such an important aspect of it, and recognizing that relationship is part of what can bring us hope when hope is hard to find.
Yeah, I also think that it's the thing that can bring us grace. So how much forgiveness is in our system? How often are we allowed to make mistakes and still be loved, and still be given the opportunity to be hopeful? And I think that, so in our tradition, the covenantal community is one of the ways that we build our beloved community. And it's only through the understanding of the words we're saying and the promises we're making, the deep understanding of what each of us means by those words, can we come to being in true relationship with one another. So I just keep thinking that now is the time. I loved it that in your example of the amputee, that what you used was silence. Because sitting in silence, almost in a Quaker kind of reverence for the silence, it's such a useful, breathing the same air, even if we're not in the same space, and what we're doing is sharing our lives together in this way, doing it with grace and with an understanding of what each of us means by what we say, is the way for us to live as Unitarian Universalists in beloved community. I really, really hope and pray that we can do that. I think that we are being called. And so each congregation really needs to take some time. Each human needs to take some time first to understand what's being asked of them. And then binding ourselves to one another, you and I, and we with the congregations, to do the work that we cannot do alone. That's beloved community. I pray that we can do that.
Yes, I pray for that also. And I pray that, as we're figuring out what these circumstances we find ourselves in mean, as we're coming to grips with that we, again, acknowledge that the things that lie before us don't necessarily have meaning built within them, but we're actually bringing meaning to them. One of the things that I feel that I could see myself having a sense of hopelessness about is just the spread of the pandemic. And one of the things that really concerns me as I look around, Well, what happens, when the doctors, when the nurses, are getting sick from COVID-19, some of them actually losing their lives. So we had the case recently where one of the doctors took her life because she just couldn't, bear with the strain of like what she had experienced. So that in some ways has a sense of hopelessness around it. I mean, because if it comes to a case where they are no longer available, then what happens to the rest of us? But the meaning that I take from that is the possibility that we can bring meaning to those losses and those lives that are already gone. And the meaning that I bring to it is like, well, if they're willing to show up every day and be present with people and look into their eyes and hold the iPhone so they can see their loved ones for a last time, then those of us who don't have that work to do, we can at least do what we can to see that there is something on the other side of this, and we can continue to stand for justice and people having what they need, and a rethinking of our priorities as cities, as states, as a whole nation, such that there's something to build from and their lives weren't lost in vain. And so that's a place where I find hope as well, that we get to choose, what the meaning is, and we can look at the examples of bravery and courage that have gone before us, and that we can find now as a way of having a sense of hope.
Oh, Carlton, may it be so.
May it be so indeed.